Welcome back to Lesson 12 of the Napoleon Hill 17 Universal Principles of Success. On this exciting program, we'll be discussing and uncovering in great depth Napoleon Hill's Lesson 12 entitled Teamwork. We have a power trio who really know and understand firsthand the power that comes with teamwork as outlined by Napoleon Hill. So before we enter this exciting session together on behalf of the Napoleon Hill Foundation, it's our great pleasure and honor of introducing our dynamic panel of guests. And they are Bob Danzig, Danny Cox, and Jim Tunney. Bob Danzig grew up in foster homes. However, he started his career young at the age of 17 as an office boy, and he rose up all the way to the ranks of becoming CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, namely Hearst Newspapers, with 6,000 employees, colleagues, and an abundance of teams. He's the author of 9 books. He's been honored as a member of the Speakers Hall of Fame. And Bob is the first recipient of the Child Welfare League Champion for Children and the only business executive ever chosen for the program awarded by Stanford University Journalism Fellowship. Bob does recall that whenever the name Napoleon Hill came up, it seemed to spark a long sentence. Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, one sentence affirming the lasting potency of his message. And joining Bob is Danny Cox. Danny Cox is a former supersonic fighter pilot and test pilot. He built a sales team that broke company records. He's the author of Leadership When the Heat's On, Seize the Day, and There Are No Limits, Breaking the Barrier in Personal Productivity. He's also a member of the Speakers Hall of Fame and Speakers Roundtable. Danny notes that Napoleon Hill's point of finding mentors certainly paid off for Danny, and he's still on the search. And thirdly and equally joining this panel is Dr. Jim Tunney, who spent 40 years as a high school teacher, coach, principal, district superintendent, 10 of those years as an inner-city LA high school principal. He was also headmaster of a private school in Monterey, California. Some of us may know him best through his 40 years as a sports official, 31 which he was a referee in the NFL, with 29 postseason games, including 4 Super Bowls. Jim is the founder of the Jim Tunney Youth Foundation, and he's also a member of the Speakers Association since 1975. He's been inducted in the National Speakers Hall of Fame, and he has been also president of the association. Jim first was acquainted by Napoleon Hill in his early 70s as he was studying for his doctorate at USC. And someone said, "Jim, have you read Think and Grow Rich?" Well, it just happened to be that Jim was walking down the street. He found a used bookstore and bought the book for 35 cents. Since then, he's read it many times, and Jim still has it today. I wonder how much that book is worth now. So with that, gentlemen, welcome to the lesson on teamwork. This is exciting.
Thank you, Phil. Good to be with you.
Nice to be with you.
Great. Well, fantastic. Well, let's just delve into this right away. I guess the first question that comes through is, through your extensive experience, what is your understanding and definition of teamwork? And Bob, perhaps we can start with you.
Sure, Phil. This is Bob Danzig, and the moment you asked me to be part of this distinguished panel on teamwork, I had an instant flashback to the consequences of a lack of teamwork, because I had just come back from Stanford University when my longtime mentor, the publisher of our newspaper in Albany, dropped dead. And I succeeded him kind of overnight, young pup as I was, and we had every Wednesday morning executive meetings. I went to my first executive meeting and sensed a total tension among the senior executive newspaper. We just went back and forth across the table. I said to myself, my God, we have no strategic purpose. We have no galvanized focus. We just got a bunch of people pointing at each other. So I determined that I had to take some steps to lubricate a pathway of teamwork, because we had no vision for our tomorrows. So what I did was I stepped away from conducting the meetings myself every Wednesday, and I appointed one of those department heads to conduct the meeting. And it was amazing how different they were when they were inviting a focus on teamwork around the table. The second thing I did was I began to send each of our major executives off for seminar trainings outside the discipline. For example, I sent our circulation director to the editor seminar for 2 weeks. I sent the editors an advertising seminar for 2 weeks. And it took me probably 4, 5, 6 months But at the end of that time, the consequence of a lack of teamwork had faded, and we were focused strategically on a new tomorrow. And we built a powerhouse for business. That was all a mirror of not accepting the lack of teamwork, the consequences of that, and building through creative, I hope, a direction, a whole new sense of unanimity of purpose. So that's exactly what came to my mind when you asked me to participate in this teamwork panel.
Fantastic. And sometimes we understand the meaning of something by observing what it is not. And that's certainly a great angle to look at it. And as we go into this lesson, we'll certainly delve into more of your stories. Jim or Danny, do you want to add to your understanding through your experience on this subject?
Well, this is Danny Cox. I like what Casey Stengel said, the great old baseball manager. He said, getting good players is easy. Getting them to play together is the hard part. And I think that was the case in my case, because I had problems at the start when I first took over an office after I'd left the Air Force. And I managed to destroy the company's top office in 3 months' time. We went from number 1 to 36 in 3 months. And, I mean, it was not a pretty sight. We had no teamwork. It had really collapsed, and that had been the number 1 office in the company. So my boss said, I'm looking for your replacement. I said, I'm going to have to learn how to do this. And I started the search. And I found that there are answers out there. And I've developed a system that helped me build on their strengths, not their weaknesses. And as they grew individually, and they saw growth in the others, then there was a camaraderie there. And that was when we really knitted together as a team.
Well, we'll certainly be interested in learning more about how you did that, Danny. And Jim, can you give us a little synopsis of your understanding of
This is Jim Tunney. Thank you very much, Phil, for the opportunity. And Bob, going back to what you said in terms of failures of teamwork, there are 4 teams in the NFL that are sitting home this week because their teamwork didn't work as well as the other 4 teams did. And they're going over that today, thinking, how can we do this a little better? I've always thought teamwork, using the word team, T-E-A-M, I created a bookmark many years ago that people use to look. By the way, those of you with iPads and Kindle, a bookmark is a little piece of paper that you put in between the leaves of the book. They may not understand that. But I say, together, everyone accomplishes more. And I think of that often in terms of the job that I had in the NFL. People say, there's no I in team, and I disagree. There is an I in team. Every member of that team is very, very important. Not that they're more important than anybody else, but it's like a gorge or a chasm between 2 cliffs, and if you want to get across to it, there's a tree on each side, and you bend each tree over to where the trees meet, just in the middle. You've created a bridge. Now, a meeting like that is not very strong, and you probably wouldn't make it walking across that kind of a bridge. But if you overlap considerably, then the bridge is much stronger. And that's what teamwork is the overlapping of your job and everybody else's, so that when everybody else doesn't do their job. And in football, it's like making a block. You make your block, you've done your job, but then there's more to do, so you make the next block. And that's the only way a team can move successfully down the field, is for everybody to do just a little bit more.
Fabulous. And you've all touched on this, and this might seem to be an oversimplistic question, but what are the outstanding benefits of being able to harness the power of teamwork?
We experienced in the last couple of years in the National Football League a thing called the bounty program, where you pay for injuring players. It's never been acceptable by players in the NFL. I've always considered football as a gentleman's game. It's a tough physical game. But they have been for years a pay for performance. For example, on a kickoff, if I were to get down there quickly and tackle the returner inside the 20-yard line, I might get an extra $20 or $25 or something paid for by the team, just an extra incentive to do my job a little bit better. I'm not necessarily a believer in extra pay for the job you're supposed to be doing anyway, but the fact that you do just a little bit extra makes a difference in terms of how the team performs.
Great insight. Bob, you wanted to add something?
One of the things that comes to my mind when I think about teamwork is the aura that's created when the mindset of those people that represent institutional teams can be modified. And just to give an example, all right, it is no great secret in the history of the Hearst newspapers they were known for yellow journalism, which was a pretty harsh pejorative taught in every journalism school in the country. So I became the head of our company. I decided we ought to do something about that. So I brought together all the editors of our major newspapers in a retreat in Texas, and I said, take the weekend, have some fun, swim, play some golf, play some tennis, but I want you to come together and talk among yourselves about what we wish to be in the future. At the end of Sunday night, they came in and said, we wish to be known for creating journalism of distinction. And I'll tell you what, folks, you give me the journalism, I'll market it, and we're going to erase the yellow journalism all the time. Well, that became such an aura of mindset change. You're talking about 59 newspapers all over the country, but their collective mindset was modified by a sense of collective team, now creating a whole new sense of reputation for us. And the yellow journalism just kind of dropped by the wayside. It just dropped by the wayside. So teamwork and mindset modified our whole reputation.
Excellent. Excellent. Danny?
Well, the thing that I've noticed in building a team was you get the synergy going when everybody's growing and developing, and they're seeing that among each other, and they become more than the sum of their parts. And that synergy is real, and you can feel it. And also, I found that the more they grew as a team, the higher the morale, the lower the turnover. And high performers do not want to leave a high morale organization, even if they could maybe make a few more bucks. They don't know how much that teamwork affects them in their production. So they don't want to leave. They want to stay there. And that was a side benefit of the teamwork.
Great point, Danny, in terms of creating the loyalty of staying on that team. You create that synergy as you talk about, and it creates that loyalty. And you're so right, that's why they want to stay there, not because they couldn't make more money someplace else or couldn't go with somebody else, but the fact that they're loyal to the people that they really enjoy being around.
Yeah, that's for sure. I remember when I was going through pilot training in the Air Force, and we were flying jets, and we were starting to learn formation flying. And the instructor said, now, you 4 pilots, you're going to be flying the airplanes and in close formation. And don't take your eyes off the lead. You keep your eyes on the lead. And one of the 4 said, what if he flies into a mountain? And he said, well, then I want 4 equally spaced holes along the face of that cliff. Well, he didn't really mean that. He was making a point. The leader has a certain responsibility to stay away from mountains, and you've got other lives that are depending on you doing the right thing.
And a team doesn't exist without a leader, does
right.
it? And yet there is this notion that everybody is a leader. I don't know if that is something everyone agrees with that, but how did that dynamic play into building a strong team?
Well, if I may, as Jim Tunney again, in the book Inspiring Teamwork, and Napoleon Hill wrote in that chapter, he quoted Peter Drucker. We've all quoted Peter Drucker for years. He's the guru of management. And he said that all employees have to see themselves as executives. And that's what happens sometimes when teamwork breaks down. Somebody doesn't feel that they're important as the other person, so they back off and they don't contribute. And one of the things that I learned to use, and I had some great mentors over the years in terms of working with a team of 7 officials on the field, and that teamwork has to be exact, and not quite as exact as flying that airplane to the side of a mountain, but pretty close. And I always took everyone on the team, we would have a meeting before the game, and people don't realize how much time is spent in preparation before you walk on the field. And I would assign the head linesman or the line judge or whatever other team to lead the discussion on a particular rule. Let's talk about Rule 8, backward pass and fumble, for example. You lead the discussion, you as the head linesman, you lead the discussion. I could do that as the crew chief, as the leader, as the head of the organization of the 7 officials. But it was important for me to bring each one of them into that they are just as important as anybody else in that team, and let them lead the discussion, let them ask the questions, let them give the points of emphasis that we need to have. And it made them feel that they're part of the team. And I think that makes the team stronger. I used a hand, 5 members of your team, all very important. You don't want to lose any one of your fingers, are very important. But when you bring your hand together as a fist, it's that much stronger. And that's what the team does, it bringing people together to make the team stronger.
Yeah.
Jim, this is Bob Danzig, and Jim has reminded me of the fact that there's a benefit to having been the office boy in the beginning of my business life, is that I kind of knew that the office boy mattered, all right? And I made it a point, whenever I traveled one of our newspapers, to have them gather up just a group of general employees for a breakfast coffee with me. And I would have them each tell me about themselves, how long they've been with the paper, what their other interests are, etc. And they asked me anything that's on their mind. And what I always told them was that no matter what their role is in the newspaper, they matter. They matter. And everybody comes together to produce this daily miracle, but that's because every one of them matters. And I have found that when you build a collective sense of being appreciated, it spills over and introduces a whole new quality to the product that you're producing. So Jim has reminded me of the fact that people deserve to know, maybe not that they're an executive, but that they matter. And that's kind of a variation of Napoleon Hill's statement to persuade all people that they are like the top executives. For example, when I ran our newspaper in Albany, New York, any day out in the office, we have 1,200 folks. And I just go up to pressmen, stereotypers, truck drivers, and I say, hi, how you doing? Never forget you matter. You matter. It became like a little bumper sticker for me. Now, they thought that was hokey or corny, but I believe that. And when you let people know they matter, they fold into being part of the broader team of what you're achieving.
Excellent. Beautiful. And Danny, you turned around a department that was at the bottom. And
yes.
How did you turn that around?
With some super motivation from my manager, the district manager, when he said, I'm looking for your replacement. That was when I built the fire under me. And I was about ready to learn some lessons, like you better get something done quick. I made the common mistake of managers. I was trying to get everybody to be me, and they didn't want to be me, which really surprised me. And I thought, what a missed opportunity for them. But that's what so many managers feel. If I can get them to do that job like I did that job, then we'll all be great. Well, it didn't work that way. I mean, the morale just went to the bottom. It had been number one. And we were, as I said, down at 36 out of 36 offices. I mean, I got to the point where I was afraid to pull into the office in the morning because, well, first of all, it would have been hard to do because they blocked all the entrances with their cars. It was kind of like circling the wagons. And I knew I was in trouble. I was afraid to even go out and put the key into the ignition at night when I was getting ready to go home. I was afraid somebody had wired my car. Matter of fact, I used to send my lowest producer out to start my car, just in case. So when my boss said, I'm looking for your replacement, I thought, well, back home we used to say, if you got a frog to swallow, don't look at it too long. And if you got more than one to swallow the biggest and first. And I thought, that's my biggest problem. I got to get away and think. And I took a pad of paper and went to the beach for 2 days. Came home at night. I was the only one there. Didn't take my wife or kids. And I sat out there and I tried to diagram what my problem was. And what I did with this pad of paper, I drew a line down the middle. And I said, that's the fence that separates me from my team, or supposed team. And how do I get everybody on the same side of the fence? And I thought about that, and I thought, I can't order them to come over. I'd already proven that. The morale was really bad. And so I thought, well, how do I work best with them? Well, then I took another piece of paper, and I drew a column on the left side, and I put weaknesses. And I was trying to figure out what their weaknesses were, which was easy, really, because with managers, they can tell you every weakness that their people have. And I wrote a long column on this first person that I wrote her name down there and all of her weaknesses. And then I drew another column, and I put strengths at the top. And I looked at that blank column, and I looked at that blank column. I said, I don't think she's got any. And I thought, no, that's not true. Well, I forced myself to start writing her strengths down, and the more strengths I wrote down, the more excited I got about her and the possibility that I might be on to something. And then the third column, final column, the strategy. How am I going to work with this person? And I found out that you've got to be aware of their weaknesses, but talk to their strengths. And they won't listen if you're talking to their weakness. Everybody they've worked for, their parents maybe, same thing, always talked about their weaknesses. But when I started talking about a specific strength that they had, it was interesting that they related to that. And to think that when you have this strength there, you got to develop it. Well, the same thing goes for the manager. Yeah, me, the manager. And that was, I had to keep growing too. And I said, it's time to go then. The strengths are going to be the thing that I concentrate on most. And that was when I really started to realize that salespeople get better right after the manager does. Kids get better right after parents do. Students get better right after teachers do, and so on. And when I came back to the office, I called a special meeting. They thought I was probably going to say, I'm leaving you. Well, I told them, I said, I've made some mistakes, and I'm going to get my leadership lessons, and I'm going to really try to make something out of this office. Result, it worked. We broke office records and company records. It was really wonderful. But what was interesting was when they got back up to the productivity level that they were at before I took over, they plateaued out. They were right at the same production level as when I took over. And that was really interesting. I thought, has this become a self-imposed barrier? And that's what it was. And I had to get them through that. And when I started challenging them, what's the best production day you ever had? What's the best week you've ever had? What's the best month? And so on. And if they didn't know what their best month production or any of the other days or weeks, I went to the records and found out what it was. And they started competing against themselves. And as a result, they really took pride in their growth. And when that happened, that was when we started to get the synergy and the team pulled together.
This is Jim Tunney. I remind you of the point that I'm just reading Ken Blanchard's book, Great Leaders Grow. And Danny talked about that as he, as a leader, needed to grow as well. And I think we all have learned that lesson, that we really grow better by our mistakes and by our victories. And the team concept in sports, where you go back and look at their film of the games they lost with much more detail than they look at the games that they won. They won it and they just think that, okay, I can always do that. And you analyze yourself a lot better when you've made a mistake and are willing to admit that mistake and to move forward.
About Danzig here, you both remind me, particularly Danny, with a story, because I think that failure can either be an invitation to fresh thinking or it just becomes an invitation to fail. And my experience of that is that when I became the head of our newspaper company, we had a bunch of these losing big city afternoon newspapers all over the country. And nobody ever thought, they just kind of they limped along. So I gathered up all my publishers, and I said to them, folks, we're on corporate welfare. We can't pay our capital needs. We're sucking up money for the magazine and television station, but how do you feel being on corporate welfare? What do you say we come together and confront that and begin to move from our failures to the possibility of success? Danny did the same thing. If he'd moved from number 1 to number 5, he may not have had the same incentive as moved from number 1 to number 36. Jim's point about the review of the films to learn what you've done wrong so you can correct them. But sometimes this is just a matter of confronting the reality of where we are and then building a new strategy from that. It was astonishing to me to see what happened once folks realized that they're just drifting along on corporate welfare. Once they made that determination, we made a few other moves, etc., put on some new leadership, we became a powerhouse. And all I did was stand and watch. It was amazing. Failure can be an invitation to new success.
And it relates back to what we talked earlier about making people feel part of the team. It's amazing to me how many business organizations use sports analogies in what they're doing. For some reason, sports just rises to the top. And I think mostly because it's visible. It's on television. Every single day you're seeing some kind of a team or some kind of an aspect of that team. And you'll notice that while the great quarterbacks like the Peyton Mannings or the Tom Brady or the people like that are so visible, if you watch them on the sideline when their offensive unit is off the field, they're going around and talking to each offensive lineman and patting him on the shoulder and saying, nice job, thank you, this is what we need to do, this is where we go. They're not saying, I'm the team, I'm the one, everybody knows Peyton Manning, everybody knows Tom Brady, But they're not saying that. They go and they talk to their teammates about how important they are to what that play was successful or why it failed. If you watch some of them, they'll sit on the bench and they'll look at the pictures of the play that happened before, why it failed, and reassuring themselves and the other people that this is what we need to do to get better. I really like that aspect of teamwork, of going around and patting people on the back. And if you watch a running back get knocked down and get tackled, one of the linemen will come over and pick them up. And I think that's what teamwork is all about, is picking up your teammates and saying, come on, we can do it again. Let's try it again. We always quote the great Vince Lombardi, who said, failure is not getting knocked down, failure is not getting back up. After you've been knocked down, that's what Danny did. And that's, people have done it all the time. You've got to get back up. It's not getting knocked down that's the failure. It's not trying again. That is the failure.
By the way, speaking of talking to strengths, this is Danny. Sarah Bernhardt, she was a famous actress worldwide. Everybody knew Sarah Bernhardt. And she said, when you tell a woman she has a beautiful profile, she begins to live sideways. and that's the same way I found my salespeople to be. When you talk to the strengths, that puts a demand on performance. And talking to a strength is not saying, oh, well, I love the tie you got on today, or I love your outfit. That's not talking to strengths. It's talking to some specific strength. And they will invariably say, you know, you're right, I do have that. Watch this. And they want to show you they can use that strength.
Bob Danzig again. My office was in Manhattan, and it took me an hour and a half train ride to get home every night. So any day I was in New York, my assistant, Marge Murphy, sent a note out to our folks saying, Bobby's here today. And they knew that by 4 o'clock that day, there had back been the name of one person that done something worth being acknowledged, one sentence describing them, their home address, and their spouses if they're married. And I sat in the train writing notes. She took 20 people a day from all over the country, and I took the 20 people, I sent them a note thanking them for their specific contribution, all right? And if they had done something really remarkable, I might put an F next to their name or a T. And when Marge saw the F, she sent flowers to the spouse of that person saying, congratulations, the good news for your Jim or your Danny. Whether she saw a T, she sent a Tiffany bracelet or a Tiffany money clip to a male spouse saying, same thing, congratulations, the good news for your Jim or your Danny. And all those people came home and said, I got these flowers. Well, I did this thing. And they talked about what they had achieved, where they were loved. Not where they just worked, where they were loved. And I did that day in and day out. I sent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these handwritten letters. And that built a kind of a sense of camaraderie and spirit. So I believe that you celebrate success. When you find ways to celebrate success, it goes way beyond the person that you're acknowledging. Nobody that Marge Murphy called wanted to fail to have somebody back to me by 4 o'clock that day that was worth acknowledging. So I think we build institutional teamwork as a subtlety by celebrating with specifics the people who have served us so well.
Jim Tunney here, Bob, but I don't have time to do that. I've got too many other things to do. I hear that so many times, and I just want to reinforce your story because as a high school principal in the inner city of Los Angeles, we'd call it a sock hop, Danny. You remember going back to the sock hops, and the kids take their shoes off and dance in the gym, and we'd have that every Friday night, and the teachers would come. We didn't pay them. They came because they loved the kids, and they were there. And I thought that was really nice. So I'd leave the dance a little early and go up to the office and write each of the 10 or 12 teachers a little note, Bob, just like you were doing, and put it in their mailbox. And then we get on an airplane on Saturday morning and fly from Los Angeles to Green Bay or Detroit or Miami or Baltimore, work an NFL game. It was my goal that every Sunday when I worked a game, I would fly back to Los Angeles and be back in the school building in the front office at 7:15 when the teachers came in, and the teacher would take that note out, and she'd read that note, and she said, well, thank you, but didn't I see you working a game yesterday in New York? And I said, yeah, that was me, yeah. Well, when you have time, well, you take the time to do that. That's what builds a team, and that's what Danny did. That's what Bob is doing. You take the time to build a team by letting people know how important they are to the team.
That's a central theme here in taking notes is acknowledgement, appreciation, encouragement, learning from your mistakes. What about accountability? How does that play into the whole mix of maintaining a strong team?
That's a good point. I'm telling you here again, if I may just jump in there. I always think that you praise in public and you criticize, constructive criticism in private. And if something is going wrong and they're not up to the standards you want, you meet with them privately and sit down and listen to them more than you tell them. Listen to what's going on and why things happen. And it happens in football officiating when a mistake is made. And we saw a lot of mistakes being made with the replacement officials this year in the National Football League when the lockout happened. And what you do is you say to the person, what did you see? What were you looking at? Why did you make that call? Let them explain it, and then help them correct that if it is an error. But I'm sure we all agree to that. We praise in public, but we criticize privately so that we build strengths that way and build people and help them overcome that problem that they might have had.
What Jim has reminded me of is the fact that talking about accountability, and of course, you do not criticize in public, all right? But I found it always useful, particularly with senior executives, when the accountability factor is not really responding as you want it to. I always try to find the root cause. I would sit down, have a coffee, tell me what's going on in your life. And very often, if some extraneous circumstance was manifesting itself in a lack of performance. But once it got out and you understood it, then you could kind of talk. So I'm a believer in root cause. Let me just give a personal example. I have 5 children. My second daughter, Marcia, was a bone cancer victim at 14, and I had to agree to have her leg amputated at the Boston hospital. And I left that hospital traumatized. But I called our corporate CEO and said, I just can't function. I just cannot function right now. Now, if I had tried to function and dropped the ball, and he only saw my not functioning well and never took the time to find the root cause, my career might have ended. But by sharing that with him, Frank Bendick, said to me, Bob, we know how to run the company. Only you can be Marcia's father. You take whatever time you need to do that job well. See, that was a root cause situation. And I did. I didn't go back to the office for weeks because I was attending to my daughter and the emotional trauma. So I have found it very useful over the years to try to get to root cause when people are not living up to the expectations or standards or accountability factors that you want.
Compassionate leadership.
Jim, tell me again, I was just thinking, Bob, in addition to that, there's an empathy, there's a sympathy on the part of the leader who is willing to understand your situation and knowing that you are willing enough to say, I can't function right now, but the leader came back and said, we understand that and take the time you need, and we need to do that in every organization. In our family, we need to do that. There are extemporaneous situations that happen that take us away from our real focus on what we're doing.
One of the points that I make in my programs is that when you gain respect, they'll just do anything for you. And the only way you can gain respect is to help them grow. And the greatest thrill that a manager can have is driving home at night saying, I saw someone grow again today, and I helped. And that is a great thrill. But I also believe that you got to keep looking for answers. I started that when my boss was looking for my replacement. When I would call somebody, I'd read the story about in the newspaper that they had a great success. They either turned a company around or started a little company and built into a big company. And I'd call them. And as soon as I got them on the phone, I said, you don't know me. My name is Danny Cox. Destroyed my company's number 1 office. Took a number 1 to 36 in 3 months' time. My boss is looking for my replacement, and I need to have lunch with you. And they'd say, you did what? And I'd repeat it. And that was where I started my learning. And people said, well, were they all in your industry? No. Matter of fact, probably a lot of the people in that industry were hoping I would fill. Maybe they could get the slot there for that former number 1 office. And I started taking notes during those lunches. And they knew I was serious, whoever my mentor was. I'm maybe just with them one time, but I called him a mentor anyway. But I'd take notes on this because I wanted to keep learning, and I wanted my people to see me continue to grow. That I would make the comment, here's what I just learned from somebody. And a result, I've got some great friends. And when I had these lunches, at the end of it, I'd say, now I'm going to go back and I'm going to try this. Now, would you like to know how it worked for me? Or if I can maybe plus it in some way, would you like to know that? They invariably said yes. And that was where I started my learning, and I feel like that's where great leaders come from, the self-education that they go for.
Bob Danzig again, Danny. What you did was you made them a member of your team.
That's right.
All those mentors, they became your team. The other thing I wanted to add is this, and I hope it's on the mark of the subject of teamwork, but I found it invaluable to not care who gets credit. We acquired a major newspaper, about $400 and some odd million, and they'd been owned by a charity. And these guys were all measured themselves by their market position, and they never ever cared about whether they made money because they were owned by a charity. We paid $416 million to buy them, and they made money in the first 7 months. And I came to realize it's not their fault. They don't know how. They began to kind of get their act together, and when they made their first $1 million in a month, I sent yellow roses to all their spouses. And I kept sending these roses for every $1 million they made in a month. They got the 12 dozen roses. They said, time out, time out. Then I had them come to New York to attend one of our corporate board meetings and have them tell the board how they did what they did. I sent them back through.
Great.
What an amazing example they were for all the other papers around the country saying, wow, they did this, and Bob Danzig never took their credit. So it's amazing what happens when you don't care who gets credit. You gave that example with Peyton and Tom Brady, okay? They take the time to acknowledge their team members. I think great leaders do that. They don't need to be in the spotlight themselves.
I listen to a lot of sports interviews, and every time I hear the word I, it just calls me instead of we, because you don't win a football game with I, you win with we. And I think that people say, well, I did this, and I did that, and I did this. Every team, every official is videotaped every game. And I've said to many people in presentations to sales groups and managers, how would you like to have a camera following around all day long and record everything you did? At the end of the day, sit down with your supervisor, your manager, your boss, and go over all those plays. That's what happens in officiating. You are reviewed every play, every call, every one. And it's important, and we talked about it earlier, but just to emphasize, it's important that you as a leader and I as a referee in charge of the crew, we're willing to admit that you made a mistake. And I think I made a mistake, let's see, last time in 1943 or 44, I can't remember which one. But I worked the Dallas Cowboy game and blew the whistle when Roger Staubach hit the ground, but he went down on his own power and fumbled the ball. And Philadelphia Eagle team picked it up, ran in the end zone, but I'd already blown the whistle, so the ball was dead. When I looked at the coach, who was just ascending from about 12 feet in the air, screaming and yelling at me, talking about the fact that my mother and father were never really married. I went over and I said to him, Coach, I said, I'm sorry, you can't have the touchdown. I blew the whistle, and he was furious. It had to be 8 or 10 years later, and I saw him at an NFL function, and he said to me, you know, when you told me that you made a mistake, you disarmed me. There's nothing I could say. I've made mistakes. My players make mistakes. You're willing the fact that you made a mistake. It's over. It's gone. Let's go on to the next play. That's a great lesson to learn. Danny and Bob both talked about. You learn a lot from your mistakes, and I lead the league.
Danny here. One more thing about mentors that I found out. When I would go back to them and say, here's what I tried and here's what happened as a result in a very positive way, they would sometimes say to me, I got somebody else I want you to meet. That was my mentor saying that. So I would pick up mentors that I would go out and have lunch with them. And always I said, I'm going to try this. And you saw me write it down. That'll go in for the work tomorrow.
Beautiful. And we've been focusing a lot on what works with the team. And as you pointed out, oftentimes we learn best from our mistakes. What are some of the things, and you pointed this out, is putting the I into the mix when it should be really the we, Jim, but selfishness being one of them. What are the other lessons we can learn that are detrimental to the strength and unity of a team?
I believe strongly that the greatest drain of energy in an organization is pettiness. And if they get involved in petty things, they're not seeing the big picture.
I think of Johnny Wooden, and I refereed basketball for 11 years when John Wooden was at UCLA. And if you look at his pyramid of success, he never has winning as part of it. They don't think about winning. They think about playing together and doing the best that they can, and winning as a result. It's almost a byproduct of them coming together. So the people who think about winning, if you hear the teams talk about that's their goal, is to win. Sure, we all want to win. We don't want to lose, certainly. But if that is the only goal rather than coming together, you lose the continuity, you lose the strength of the team. You come together, and we've said this many times in the last hour, you come together from your failures, not from your successes. But don't think about only winning. It's a matter of working together and playing together.
Excellent.
Bob Danzig here, picking up on that. And in my experience, credit grabbers are very detrimental to team performance. Okay, they have some compulsive need to get credit. And I can remember when I was running our newspaper in Albany, New York, we had a couple of credit grabbers in our sales area, which Danny may relate to. But I would have them take the poorest performer and tell them that they've got the responsibility over a month to make that poorest performer them.
Interesting.
The credit grabbers had to share and cultivate other people. They didn't always succeed at it, but it kind of smoothed out their need to be grabbing that spotlight all the time.
Yep.
So I find credit grabbers detrimental.
Excellent. So what we've got here is credit grabbers that ties with selfishness, pettiness, and Jim, you pointed out having perhaps the wrong goal or perspective on things. What about communication? Is that an area of breakdown in terms of keeping a team strong and unified?
We have a speaker in the NFA for years that we all know is gone now, one of our mentors, Bill Gove. And Bill was a great sports fan, and he would say, now, what happens on the field when one official makes a call and throws the flag, and you as the referee go to him, what does that official say? What do you say to him? And I say to him, what do you got? He said, is that what you say? What do you got? I said, that's what I say. What do you got? And then he told me, what do you got? And what we find in officiating is happening right now, and this is the current thing in the day we're talking about now, is that officials are more interested in not making a call and letting instant replay cover up what they should have called. Because if they call it and they call it wrong, they get what we call a downgrade, and they're more interested in themselves, and that's that pettiness that Danny talked about. The pettiness of saying that if I don't call this, I'm not going to be wrong, but if I call it, I could be right, I could be wrong. That's not the way you run an organization. You've got to do what you're trained to do and do it to the best of your ability. And if you make a mistake, you make a mistake. But they're afraid if they make too many mistakes, they won't get in the playoffs. They won't get in the Super Bowl. That's the wrong goal. That's the winning goal. The end result, what you want to be in the Super Bowl, of course, but you don't work each game thinking, this is how I'm going to get in the Super Bowl.
My experience is that a lack of communications is a communications itself. That can get created, that can be so misguided, so misdirected, if you don't take the time to care about keeping the pipeline of communications open with your colleagues.
Communication, by the way, Bob, is the exact thing that happened with the replacement officials in that Seattle-Green Bay game. I don't know, everybody from the third grade on knows about it. I don't know how they all saw that play, but it must have been 100 million people saw that play. But the communication between the officials broke down, and one official called one thing and the other official called the other. Instead of talking to each other before they made the call, they could have gotten it right. But they didn't. They made the call, and it's nice to make the call if you think you're sure, but there's another official involved. So the communication between those two officials was vital in making the call correct in that game.
And there's also understanding different communication styles, that not everybody is the same. I think we go to that whole assessment of DISC, that there's some directs, there's some high influencers, and so forth. What have you learned about different personalities and how to foster and address that in the framework of team?
One of the things I noticed, especially working with the sales team, you get somebody in there that had a lot of raw talent and had a fabulous first year. And we've seen this in celebrity world too. I say that if you don't know how you got there, then you're in trouble because you make mistakes. And the result, it's short-lived, and that was what I tried to find out. And by the way, on those strengths, I kept that list, not laying out on my desk, or they would have wired in my car, but because they'd read the weakness column. But I'd added to the strengths column all the time throughout the time that I was their manager. And they knew then that I was seeing them grow and discovered another strength. And that communication was extremely valuable.
There are obviously different personalities, and I think the leader has to be like the maestro of an orchestra. He has to allow for the fact that the violinist is different than the tuba player, all right? You can't smooth them all out. And the leaders, the team builders' responsibility is to allow those nuances of difference, but to still pull them together so that they're making the sound of a great symphony work. But you don't have to obliterate or diminish or demean their individual personalities. That's all part of the symphony.
I did hear Ken Blanchard say ego means edging God out. And I think of that in terms of in playing golf for the last couple of decades, and I'm now to the point where I'm playing less, but I'm playing up on the forward tees now. Not back where the men play, but up where the women play. And I had to put my ego aside and said, I can't hit them from back there. I want to play this game for the fun of it. I'm going to play as close as I can. So you've got to put ego aside if you're going to be part of the team.
Yeah, and on that note, your good friend Don Shula, when he was asked what the secret to his success was in winning, I think being the winningest coach in the NFL, he says, I try to find out as much as I can about every player on the team, and then I try to get the most out of him and blend those talents into a team.
He did that well.
Well, that is fabulous. Gentlemen, you have given us pearls of insight and wisdom based on your experience and expertise, and it's just been a real joy having you all on the program. As we wind down, if there was one major takeaway that you would want to impart to our listeners, what would that be? And perhaps along with that, you could just let our listeners know where we can find out more about you in terms of your websites and so forth. And so perhaps we can just go in alphabetical order by first name and start with you, Bob.
Well, to me, the major takeaway is to understand that teams are cultivated. Leaders do that. They do that by understanding their folks, understanding their differences, and bringing them together for higher achievement. And if they want to know more about this, they can go to my current website, www.bobdanzig.com, soon to become www.youareworthwhile.com.
Beautiful. Danny.
I think that I would like to leave them with the thought that leadership really is the ability to use the job to develop the person while having fun doing it. And I always encourage them to make their job fun. I couldn't make all their job fun, but they could. And then they would report on what they'd done. And sometimes it was a surprise. But they did have fun, and as a result, we had that incredible high morale that just stopped turnover. My website is www.dannycox.com.
Great insight. Jim, why don't you take us home here?
Thank you very much. The first book I wrote, Impartial Judgment, I dedicated to my father, who said, believe in yourself. He taught me to believe in myself. And as a team member, I've got to believe in myself. And then I go back to the acronym, Together Everyone Accomplishes More. I can do it, and I can be part of it, but I can do it a lot better if I include people on that team and they come together, as I say, the fingers on the hand becoming a fist. And I'm at www.jimtunney.com. Jim, J-I-M, Tunney is T-U-N-N-E-Y, jimtunney.com. And it's a pleasure for me to join Danny and Bob in this whole thing. And Phil, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Beautiful. Well, listen, it's been just a real blessing, and you've offered some treasures of insights for our listeners. Thank you all for being on our program. And listeners, stay tuned for Lesson 13, Overcoming Adversity and Defeat with Captain Charlie Plum, Roger Crawford, and Frank O'Day. And that promises to be an empowering program. Gentlemen, thank you so much. God bless you. And we look forward to learning more from you as we visit your websites.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.